Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody. Shall we make a start? Today's webinar is on the Alliance Contract, NEC4 Alliance Contract. It's a two-part webinar, and we're doing one today, and then there's a sort of second part to this in a couple of weeks' time. Okay. Today's webinar was going to be done by me and Rob Gerrard. Unfortunately, Rob is having IT issues, so won't be, well, hopefully will be joining us shortly, but he's not on the system at the moment. So you got the pleasure of my company. My name's Tim Lee Robinson. I'm an NEC consultant and was a member of the NEC4 drafting team. As you can see on the slide, I've had quite a few years experience of using the NEC contract. And amongst other things, I was involved in writing the user guides for all the NEC contracts, including the user guides for the Alliance contracts. So what are we going to look to cover in this session? We look at sort of the NEC's approach to alliancing from a sort of strategic point of view, and sort of a little bit about what alliancing is. We'll then look at the contract itself, the structure of the contract, and how maybe this contract differs a little bit from other NEC contracts from a point of terminology. And then we'll be looking at contract strategy in terms of what options are available in terms of secondary options and things like that in terms of creating your contract for the alliance. So, NEC's approach to alliancing. All NEC contracts have a clause 10.2, of course, which requires the parties to work on a collaborative basis. And that's common to all NEC contracts, even long forms and the short form contracts. The long form contracts, most long form contracts have X12, which is a multi-party collaboration clause, and allows the client to better align the parties and other contractors where there are large projects, infrastructure projects, that sort of thing, to a common set of objectives. In terms of the NEC contract, it's a much more integrated approach in terms of the NEC Alliance contract, and we'll start looking at that in a little bit more detail very shortly. The NEC's contract takes a lot of inspiration, if you like, from the Alliancing Code of Practice, and is designed to bring together the whole team, different tiers of supplier, and the whole team in terms of not just the client and the contractor, but key subcontractors or key suppliers, designers, and bring them together to achieve a common set of objectives for the client, and in bringing them together, providing a set of incentives on those parties to achieve the client's objectives. The contract is designed for major projects or programs of work. In terms of setting up an alliance contract, it's going to take a bit of time to set up an alliance, and so it's designed really for major projects or where there may be a series of projects. It's designed to be used in that sort of situation, and of course with those major projects and programs of work, through setting up the contract and during the course of that works, the collaborative behaviours and the team can build the relationship to best achieve the client's objectives. The second bullet on this does sort of highlight the fact that it can be used for low value projects, but that's in the context of you know, a larger program of work. So you might have lots of small value projects, but they're all done under one umbrella, which is the Alliance contract. And there's very simplistically, and we'll talk about it later, or I think in the next session, there is a system by which work can be called off, as in the low value projects can be called off as and when required. It's worth just noting that obviously the Alliance contract is about building an asset. It's not really geared to operating asset, unlike, say, the term service contract or the DBO contract. In terms of the members of the Alliance, so these are the key partners, or they are called partners. So these are the key members of the project team that are working together. The way this contract works is they all have an equal voice. So the partners all have an equal voice in terms of how they're going to take the project forward or the program of work forwards. And ultimately, the sort of key thing here is about achieving the client's objectives. There is the client has very sort of some limited powers in terms of having the last word, in terms of addressing certain key issues, but generally speaking, it's the partners who decide on what happens and how it happens. So this slide highlights, sort of gives you an example of how the alliance, the members of the alliance are maybe structured. And within the green circle, all those members within the green circle would be the partners. So of course you would have a client, they would definitely be a partner. You may have one or two contractors, tier one contractors, and suppliers and consultants, and they would all form part of the alliance. You may of course have, sitting outside of that, key subcontractors who would also form part of the alliance team. We'll spend a few minutes maybe talking around this and trying to sort of explain the key elements of this. So, like all NEC contracts, there is a client, and summarised on the left there, the sort of key functions of the client are set out. So in terms of the overall alliance objectives, that's a function that the client basically decides. Of course, the client also would provide the initial scope for the project or program of work. We'll come back to client requirements and the performance table in a minute, but that's a sort of a key element in terms of the performance table in particular. Is a key element in terms of how the contractor or how the alliance is rewarded from a commercial point of view. Of course, the client would also select members of the alliance, the partners, if you like. And another function on the client, so this is different to, say, other NEC contracts where maybe the project manager or the service manager is doing this. Another responsibility of the client is assurance in terms of cost and quality, in terms of is the alliance achieving the quality requirements set out in the scope. The Alliance Board. So the Alliance Board is of course made up of all the partners, and they all have an equal voting right. So the client is one of the partners and has equal voting rights with all other partners. And the other partners, as we looked at on the previous slide, could be contractors, consultants, suppliers, or subcontractors. Obviously, in the case of suppliers and subcontractors, or even the consultants, they're likely to be the key consultants and suppliers and subcontractors that are involved in the project or program of work. The Alliance Manager is similar to, say, the project manager or service manager under other NEC contracts, but their role is different. The Alliance Manager, as the name suggests, they manage the Alliance, and in particular managing the Alliance delivery team in terms of delivering the work that the Alliance is doing. Okay, the Alliance Manager takes instructions and direction from the Alliance Board, primarily, and of course the client, but primarily the Alliance Manager is managing the project, the program of work, on a day-to-day basis on behalf of the Alliance Board, and the Alliance Board of course makes the decisions and directs the Alliance Manager accordingly. And so of course in making the decisions, the Alliance Board, being made up of the various partners, they all have an equal say in terms of how things should be done, and so on and so forth. We've talked a little bit around this already, but the client and the partners, they form the Alliance. So the client is part of the Alliance. The client is part of the entity that is delivering the project, if you like. The Alliance Board, as I say, is made up of the partners, and the Alliance Manager is managing the delivery on behalf of the Alliance Board. We still have senior representatives like we do with other NEC contracts, and they have the same similar function as they do under other forms of contract, other NEC contracts, in terms of dispute resolution. Moving on to sort of talk a little bit about the documentation side of things. As with all other NEC contracts, we have a scope document, and within the scope document there is a set of client requirements. Client requirements, if you like, are the sort of the minimum requirements in terms of what the client wants to achieve. The board have the power to change the scope. The client has the power to change the client requirements. The board can't change the client requirements. The Alliance objectives, obviously these are set primarily by the client, but the board would be involved, and of course this is about what the board, the Alliance Board, want to get out of this project or program of works. The performance table is used to reward the Alliance. So essentially this is about commercially rewarding the Alliance, and it's used in a way, in a number of different ways, which we talk about a little bit in due course on one of the slides, I think. But it's used in a number of different ways in terms of incentivizing the Alliance to deliver on the objectives. and in doing so paying the alliance or rewarding the alliance from a commercial point of view accordingly. The implementation plan is a document, as it suggests there. It basically describes what the alliance is, who the members of the alliance are, and how the work that they're going to do is split up between the alliance members or the organisations that form part of the alliance. So we'll move on a little bit and talk a little bit about contract strategy and things to think about in terms of creating your alliance contract. So as with other NEC contracts, there is a core set of clauses, clauses 1 to 9, that are used every time. There is no main option clause, but there are a number of secondary option clauses that are used in terms of options around how you want to create your contract strategy. The reason why there's no main option clause is because that's the requirements around payment are embedded within the core clauses, and as the first bullet mentions, the payment mechanism is centred on how you structure the performance table and how you want to reward the alliance. We still use the concept of defined cost plus fee, and in doing so there is a scheduler cost components, the main scheduler cost components. You've still got contract data part 1 and part 2, and essentially the client would fill out part 1, and each partner, in this case you've got contract data part 2 for each of the partners who form the alliance. They would fill out the relevant bits of part 2 to suit them. It talks about the various options to select and by whom. Hopefully people will appreciate that in setting up an alliance contract, it's unlikely to be done in a sort of more traditional transactional way, as with other typical contracts where you do a competitive tender and appoint the chosen contractor or team. Usually alliance contracts are set up through a method of negotiation and all that goes with that. So it's likely that through that process of selection and negotiation, that the alliance partners will have a voice in terms of what options are chosen to best suit the objectives that are being sought to be achieved. Some of these options, secondary option clauses, hopefully will be familiar in that they generally exist in other NEC contracts. You'll notice that they're not all there. NEC4 performance guarantee, this provides options in terms of whether you want an ultimate holding company guarantee or a performance bond, or neither. It provides all those options in the one secondary option. There are the sort of common other secondary option clauses that are common to other NEC contracts in terms of X2, changes in law, X9, transfer of rights to do with design, information modelling, and limiting liability. Performance table. There are a number of secondary option clauses that are missing from the alliance contract because they're not needed, because they can be achieved through the performance table. So you've got a list there, sort of X6, 7, 16, 17 and 20. So of course X6 is a bonus for early completion. You don't need X6 given that you can achieve the same thing through how you draft the performance table. X7, delay damages, again, these can be achieved through how you draft the performance table, as you can with retention, if you really want to have retention, and low performance damages. Clearly, the performance table is about trying to incentivize the contractor to achieve the objectives. So it's unlikely you're going to try to use retention, but more likely you're going to use things like KPIs and rewarding the contractor, or the alliance, should I say, in terms of paying him. The performance table, in terms of how it can be used, there's obviously a lot of flexibility there. It's probably a very important document, and probably one of the more important documents in this particular contract. I'm not saying scope and contract data aren't important, but the performance table is going to be a key document in this contract. So a lot of thought needs to go into how one prepares the performance table to ensure that it delivers on the client's objectives or the alliance objectives. X22, early alliance involvement. So this is the equivalent of ECI under the engineering construction contract. So of course this allows you to bring in the supplier, the alliance team, at perhaps an earlier stage, in terms of perhaps building the alliance and dealing with certain issues prior to then actually pressing the button on work delivery. And of course, to some extent or another, given how the alliance is likely to be procured, there's always going to be some sort of initial phase where the team need to bed together, and the alliance contract and certain elements of it are decided between the parties in terms of getting the best result. With X22, of course, like it is with the other NEC contracts that it sits in, there is a break point in terms of the end of stage 1 and prior to starting stage 2, and depending on the submission and the acceptability of the submission. X26. So X26, I mentioned sort of near the beginning, I think, about the ability to sort of call off work, and that's really the function of X26, is that through this provision, this is where, should we call it, projects or smaller projects can be called off. They talk about schemes, but you can call off work throughout the life of the alliance. As it says there, there's going to be a bit of detail in contract data about what these projects are, what are they likely to be, so that, of course, when you're procuring the alliance, they know the type of work. So it's not just any work, it's within a sort of defined set of parameters. There's a plan there in terms of what type of work is going to be called off during the life of the alliance. And of course, as you deal with each of these schemes or pieces of work, the specific scope and other bits of information would be provided for each of those pieces of work relevant to those pieces of work. I think that's it for this session. We're into the Q&A now, so hopefully some people may have some questions, and if you want to put them on to the so in terms of sort of most suitable projects to use the alliance contract on, we're really talking about large contracts. We're talking about something like a power station, a new power station, something like that, or like a new airport. That's the sort of thing that you are likely to use this type of contract for. And I say that based on the fact that it's going to take time to set up the contract in terms of forming the alliance and of course through the selection process, assessing how suitable the contractors and the team members are to work within the alliance. The need for those team members or partners to be able to work collaboratively is of course more important under this contract than it would be, say, under other more or less collaborative NEC contracts. This contract is about sort of sharing the risks and working together to mitigate the risks to a far greater extent than other NEC contracts. So that's only going to work if you have a team that is working effectively together in terms of collaborating to deliver on the objectives. So the setup is going to take a bit of time.
Tim, it's
yes.
Rob Gerrard here. Can you hear me?
Yes. So I was just taking a question about what would be the most suitable projects to use on Alliance contracts.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you sort of heard how I was responding to that, but I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Certainly those that are complex, complicated, definitely not really the sort of things that most straightforward projects wouldn't lend themselves to an Alliance contract. So something of an adventurous nature, something where you really need the power of collaboration to bring the project to a successful.
Yeah, I mean, I was suggesting that it was, you're talking about a large sort of infrastructure type project, like a sort of a power station or maybe an airport or something like that, that's got a lot of different moving parts, and that you need a big team for that work effectively together.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
And the other issue I sort of thought about was that obviously the time taken to set up the alliance means that you're not going to use it on more straightforward, smaller type projects.
Yeah, this does require some considerable investment. So it's risk and reward, really, isn't it? You wouldn't spend the time and effort setting something up that will go relatively straightforward with normal conditions of contract.
Sure. I've got another question for you then, Rob. What do we do when the partners in the alliance disagree?
Well, then they need to agree. So you have to change the question, change something such that they ultimately agree. You need that complete agreement, don't you, going forward as an alliance? So you might need to change the thing that they're disagreeing, change the question that they're disagreeing on in order for them to agree, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Something could be just too adventurous, or ultimately there might be one of the partners who does not wish to agree perhaps on anything. You might have to replace that partner. Don't be afraid to replace partners if you need to.
And is it fair to say that sort of the main way of managing all of that you've just said is, of course, through the Alliance Board? That's really the sort of function of the Alliance Board.
That is exactly right. So what are they doing? They are setting strategy, appointing the alliance manager. Their decisions have to be unanimous. They have to make that decision, so I think sometimes, like I say, you might need to change the question to get a unanimous decision. Look at how Brexit unfolded, for example. Didn't get a unanimous decision. We got a majority decision, didn't they? How did they do that? Yeah. They kept changing the question that was posed.
Yes.
So I don't know. I haven't personally worked on NEC4 Alliance contracts, but you may have to change the decision asked of them to get a unanimous decision, or you may have to remove one of the partners who possibly doesn't want to play ball. I don't know. You would expect not, but yeah, you have to do something. If you keep asking the same question, you are likely to keep getting the same answer, and that is a definition of insanity, isn't it?
And I guess part of this comes back to, building the alliance in the first place, doesn't it? And making sure that the partners are really truly aligned with the objectives that the client and of course the partners have set.
Yeah, and that all the parameters seem reasonable and in place, and it's realistic and achievable, and don't just sign up for the heck of it because you think it would be quite interesting. So you've got to consider these things. I mean, if I've got to be quite honest here, is that I see the alliancing is the top of the pile for collaboration. To me, it's the ultimate collaborative way of working. And if I'm honest, I'm yet to meet any companies who I think can really carry off alliancing in its true and pure form. So I think the NEC contract is a pure form of alliancing. So I'm still waiting to meet organisations who I think can actually work in that pure alliancing model. I mean, we'll look at the next webinar, but there's a clause, basically a no-sue clause. So even though you might end up with a bunch of idiots who don't do things properly, you've agreed not to sue each other. So, how many organisations will jump at the chance to sign up to that? Not many in my experience. But just because, we may not be ready right now, but these things take time, don't they, perhaps? And I think we're still a maturing industry. We've only been building things for upwards of 2,000 years. So you've got to give us a bit of a chance to sort our collaboration out. But it's the top of the pile, isn't it? I think it's quite a leap to get from the ECC plus option X12 to the NEC4 Alliance contract. It is not for the faint-hearted.
No, and that's where there's obviously moving to using this contract, the degree of trust and collaboration and all that goes with that is far greater when using this contract than, say, any part of the ECC, even with X12 under the ECC. And that's the big leap, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Trust comes over time, doesn't it? So the first thing you need to do is to be honest, and if people are honest and ethical and saying the right thing at the right time, then those levels of trust will emerge. Will it be sufficient? All the level of trust in the world be sufficient to save a bad case project? Well, I don't think so. Ultimately, the alliance may well prove, particularly if you've got a two-stage alliance, that your business case is fundamentally flawed, perhaps.
Sure.
I'd rather find that out early doors in a project than after the expense of design and tender and find out that the price is twice that which I had at my disposal.
Sure. We've got another question. How can NEC support users to use the Alliance contract for the first time? Sort of comes back to what you've just been saying, I think, perhaps.
I think so. I mean, it's a maturing thing and a maturity. So collaboration, I think, is a developing theme. Let me get the words right around.
Sure.
We are maturing. We are learning how to spell the word collaboration. Next, we need to move on to be collaborative. And I think over time we will get there. But I'm still talking about in training sessions about the concept of showing float on a program and still getting barriers or kickback on that. So if you're at that level of collaboration, which isn't very collaborative at all, how on earth are you going to operate at this level?
No, that's right. I mean, certainly, obviously, NEC can support in terms of explaining how the contract is intended to work. And advising in terms of how the different parts of the contract should be drafted. But of course, ultimately, the client and their partners need to have a good understanding of this contract before they really venture anywhere near this, and a good understanding of alliancing full stop. Not NEC, but just alliancing full stop, don't they? And I think it's fair to say that alliancing is an emerging form of procurement that different parts of the world have never even done, and some parts of the world have started to do more and more.
So Australia's been doing it for quite a while. So when I was with Arab, I can remember I think the first alliancing project. I can't remember exactly what the name was now, and that was in sometime in the 80s. Can't remember the project, but never mind. And but recently, what I've understood from Australia is it has moved back from the alliancing market, and that's probably because alliancing isn't a good fit for all projects or organisations. It's horses for courses. Sometimes it's build only for a contractor, sometimes design and build, sometimes DBO, sometimes use X12, sometimes use the alliance contract. You have got to select the right procurement route for your particular project. This one, I think, needs a much deeper thinking of the softer side, the behavioural side of organisations. So do we have the right fit? I would do much more consideration of, I mean, the previous question, or the question you said, the first question was, what happens when you disagree? What a really good question to interview prospective alliance partners. What if we disagree on the time? I think it's 1 o'clock. You think it's 2 o'clock. What would we do? Reach an impasse, fold our arms, sue each other?
Sure.
You know, I think you've got to think very long, hard, and carefully about the people with whom you are going to align your expectations with.
And I think on that point, Rob, it's fair to say that when selecting those partners or the partners, it's less to do with, shall we say, the commercial aspects of it, which you might focus on using other forms of contract, and it's actually more to do with their sort of behaviours and how collaborative or not collaborative they are, and assessing sort of human characteristics, shall we say, of the proposed team. That's going to be an important function that needs to be done and considered through the procurement process or the selection process.
Definitely, and it's not about just perhaps the senior people in the organisations. It's all the way through. How will people in their respective organisations step up to the requirements of behaving in the correct way according to alliance principles and ideals? Do we really grasp the concept of alliancing? I don't think we do. The world throughout, I don't think we do.
It's a difficult thing to get your head around, I think, because I perhaps struggle with it a little bit myself in terms of thinking how this contract works and how you would resolve issues, obviously through the alliance board. But if that board can't function properly, then you've got a real problem, haven't you?
I think you can look around. I mean, you can use sort of mediation type techniques here. So if you want a decision to be made and it has to be made unanimously, then you have to look at different ways, different means by which you might get to that unanimous decision. But unfortunately, that unanimous decision may not meet the requirements of the client in terms of their ultimate objectives. It's different. You cannot force people to agree to everything, can you?
No, that's right. I mean, on the point of sort of selection and behaviour assessment and that sort of thing, and coming back to, I think, a previous question, I think we've provided, NEC have provided some guidance in the volume 3 user guide, selecting a supplier. There's a bit of guidance in the back of that volume around behaviour assessment. But of course, that only really gives a very high level sort of things to think about, and for any particular alliance contract, there's going to need to be a lot of detail behind that in terms of how we actually go about that.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe Australia's got a lot that they could share in terms of alliancing, how to go about selecting organisations, selecting individual people. I can remember a long time ago, the firm I was with, picking people for a particular project based upon, how people react to certain things. I thought it was maybe a little bit ahead of its time, but is it really? I don't know.
Sure. I've got another question. Hopefully you know something about Project 13, Rob.
Unless I spell it.
How does the Alliance Contract and ICE's Project 13 initiative work together? Do they support one another? I confess I don't know a lot about Project 13.
So Project 13 is more about working from the normal business as usual, moving away from the normal transactional approach.
Sure.
I think there'd be a pretty good fit. I must admit, Project 13 isn't about alliancing. Alliancing isn't about Project 13, but I think there's a tremendous amount of crossover in the attitude, mindset, thinking, and collaboration. So all those sorts of words, there's a lot of crossover. But I don't think it's right to say that you can only use the alliance contract for Project 13 type.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
vice versa. Again, it's horses for courses, isn't it?
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
So do they support one another? Well, yeah, they can do it in the right project with the right people in the right scenario. If you want to achieve those incredible levels of collaboration, or you need to. I mean, we have to make this work, don't we? I remember the project. It was called the Wandu Alliance. Wandu Alliance. Oil rigs somewhere at sea.
Sure.
And the whole basis of this was we have a problem. So the operative word is we, not you or I. So we have a problem. And it's not about the alliance members turning to that one person who's struggling to fix something. So you better fix it or else. It's what can we do to help? What is the problem? How can we help? Could we take some of that off you? Could we get somebody else to do it? What is the problem? How long might it take? What can we do?
And just exploring that a little bit, Rob, in terms of that sort of thing. Of course, that again is a key function of the Alliance Board, isn't it? In terms of, where should we say, where a partner might be struggling, should we say, this is where the Alliance Board, ultimately makes decisions about how that is, how they are supported or how that is resolved.
Yeah, because we're all in it together. We really have to succeed. We think we can succeed. That's why we signed up to this in the first place and have been working hard for the last few months. But maybe one of the partners, their I don't know, their organisation has dipped for some reason, let's say, and I don't know, people have left and their performance has wavered and
Sure.
they need replacing. So let's put them out of their misery and replace them. Hopefully that's a rarity. Hopefully you pick up sensible partners in the first place. But you have to be realistic, don't you? If you stick your head in a bucket of sand and hope that the problem goes away, there's every chance it will not go away. You have to do something.
Right.
You have to have a plan, have to have a backup plan, and have to be not brutal, but you have to be realistic and honest, don't you?
Yes, that's right. Definitely. But that's, of course, the Alliance Board is there to work through that, aren't they? And ultimately make decisions around the best way forward, whether that's supporting or not. As in removing. Because you're all in it together.
Yeah, I mean, the particular role that interests me is the alliance manager. So we do, as you and I both do, we do lots of project manager accreditation type training. How on earth would you do accreditation training for an alliance manager? So that's one step.
That I think that might be quite challenging.
Might be quite challenging.
Think about that one.
And where would they come from? Where do you think the alliance manager comes from? From one of the partners, probably. What do you think?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the alliance manager is working on behalf of the alliance board.
Yeah,
I think, in some ways, I think they could come from a partner. I guess the downside of that, thinking about it, is if there's any perceived, and of course this is where collaboration and trust and etc comes really in. If the manager comes from one of the partners, do they have a bias towards that partner? Would that be detrimental in the contract?
I mean, they shouldn't do, because they are greatly involved in financial type matters, so they need to be that what do they call them, independent certifier.
Sure.
Well, there are probably some special characters out there who naturally fit the role of the alliance manager, and you probably find they're perhaps very small consultants. I don't know. But
Yeah,
it'd be interesting to study the traits, expectations, skills of a competent alliance manager. And the sort of, not about the tricks of the trade, but the sort of things that they have to do in order to perhaps induce that unanimous decision making by the board and those sorts of things.
Because of course, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob. A slight difference in this contract is it's the alliance manager who produces the program.
Yeah.
Rather than the, whereas it sort of the equivalent under other contracts is it would be the project manager who receives the program and doesn't produce the program, whereas in this case it's actually the alliance manager who produces the program.
Which is
so their skill set is slightly different, isn't it, to should we call it a project manager under the ECC?
So maybe that'll come out in the second webinar session. So it's quite difficult,
Sure.
You notice the fact now that you think, well, that's quite interesting. But when you get into and read the contract, then when we use the word alliance manager does this, the alliance manager does that, we start to shape your expectations of an alliance manager. What sort of person fits that role?
Sure, definitely.
Any other things? Any other parts of any other questions? I don't think so. So it is like you said, it's a true alliance. So I think it is what I call pure alliancing. I hear in the industry people use the word alliancing quite a bit, and it's a bit of a buzzword. And I think certainly the UK government have been throwing that term around. So I'm never convinced people truly alliance. But then there's 101 perhaps definitions of what an alliance is. I think what NEC have done is quite brave by putting sort of a line in the sand to say this is what we believe alliancing to be, and that I can see is more along the lines of true alliancing. When I studied certainly the Australian method, it was, or most of them were at the time some years ago, without penalties, no penalties. I'm saying, well, what about delay damages? Surely you have that. No. What about, these sort of bonds? No penalty type provisions whatsoever, incentives only.
Yeah.
That's very different to the norm, isn't it?
No, that's right. And I think this is where, thinking back earlier, one needs to consider very carefully how the performance table is prepared. Because of course through the performance table you can have penalties, but equally you can have rewards, can't you? And
the more penalties, I think, slides you away from the true alliancing virtues. But
and of course that's likely to have adverse effects in terms of behaviours and so forth that you're actually trying to build. So it's a difficult balance, and of course this is where I guess as part of setting up the alliance, I think I mentioned this earlier in the session, it's not necessarily down to the client, if you like, to prepare all the documentation and put it all together and say, well, this is what it's going to be. That should in part be a function of the alliance itself, should it not?
Yeah, which is why I quite like the two-stage approach. I mean, I like two-stage in construction anyway, but on more complex projects certainly, and even more so here. You've got to get all your ducks in a row. I think on this one, take great care. I mean, we need to know what the client's objectives are, but we need to know about the partners. What are the partners' objectives? And we need to be honest and realistic and make sure that we think we can achieve all of those objectives. And if not, say so, and then maybe we change the objectives over time. I don't know. Get to a point that you all say, it's going to be tough little cookie, this one, but we think we can achieve it. Don't gamble. Don't just say yeah.
No, indeed.
Any more? Just looking back over the slides. So
I can't see any other questions we've got, but we've still got a few minutes to go. But if there's any other issues you want to pick up, Rob, from the slides, I've put up the slide now for the next session, which is on the 23rd of June. Okay. At the same time then. But is there anything else you wanted to sort of raise, Rob, in terms of the slides or issues?
I don't think so. I mean, with the idea of this two-stage one is to just kick around the concept of alliancing at a fairly high level.
Yeah.
Introduce people to the fact that it's probably the height of collaboration. I can't see you can get too much higher than this. There's a lot of careful thinking about objectives and about organisations and behaviour of organisations. That there's, it is probably reserved for the certainly larger, financially more complex projects where you really need the strength of collaborative working. But it's equally quite a scary prospect for the individual organisations, the partners.
Yeah.
There's a no-sue clause.
So of course that relationship, developing that relationship, facilitating the development of that relationship, are all going to be important factors in the success of using this contract, more so than any sort of transactional thing.
Yeah, and you asked about what NEC can do and training and things like that. I definitely think you need to focus quite a lot on the softer side of of the skills that people have. We do training what the contract says and what it means, and we can do all of that. But do your people have the right mindset to carry this off? ? All of that said, if you go on most organisations' websites these days, you will find the word integrity, honesty. You might even find the word alliancing on there, or similar principles. You will find the word collaboration on there. And over time, we will see who really actually can talk the talk.
Yes, because I think it's fair to say that they're very good aims to have, but they're also very difficult to maintain and achieve, aren't they?
Yeah, and we have to start somewhere. To me, I find it quite exciting. I think the thought of the ultimate form of collaboration, which to me is alliancing, is quite exciting. But pick the right project and pick the right organisations. And give it a whirl. What could possibly go wrong? Well, probably quite a lot of things. But don't gamble.
Set it up in the appropriate way, and it will be a success.
Yeah. Think about the implications of all of these things. So, if some of these things that we've been talking about today gives you the shudders, then I would say the alliance contract is not for you. Neither is collaboration. But over time, I think we will move into that what's the word, into that zone.
Yes.
Collaboration zone. I think we're getting there. We're getting better. So I'm getting really old now, but decade upon decade, I see significant shifts away from brutal sort of adversarialism, contempt and hatred, into this is quite interesting, this alliancing stroke collaboration thing. So we'll get there. As I say, the human race has only been going for I don't know how long, and the construction industry has only been going for so long. But put these things out there.
But I think it's fair to say, Rob, that this contract was first published last year, and obviously there was a consultative version, in 2017. But there are clients, certainly in the UK, that are already using this contract, aren't there? So there have been a number of clients who have already jumped into this with the NEC4 Alliance Contract.
Good stuff, and those same clients have probably been using NEC for quite a while and probably very excited to try something different. So there's a journey, isn't there? I think you should treat
definitely a journey
as a journey, and this is not necessarily the end of the journey if it goes right or wrong. It's just a journey, isn't it? And you have to see what you have to do as an organisation to successfully carry off those alliance in principles in certain circumstances. It is not for every individual. It may not be for every organisation. You know, give it. Well, not quite give it a go. That's the wrong thing to say. It's a bit too cavalier, but
sure,
you know,
no,
the right circumstance. In the right circumstance, you should try these things. You should test yourself. You should want to collaborate more. You should want to create the sort of outcomes that can only be done through collaboration, through alliancing.
definitely.
Good principles, good solid principles. Okay. So, somehow we've talked for half an hour there, haven't we? Bless us.
I think so. Yes, I think we're done. I don't think there's any other questions from the audience.
From Lucy, bless her.
Thank you, Lucy. So we've got another webinar on the 23rd of June at 10 o'clock UK time. Can't remember what time it is where you are, Rob.
5 o'clock or so, something like that. We got our social distancing right today, didn't we? So we're about, I don't know, 7,000 miles away or something. So nobody can complain.
Something like that, yeah. Perhaps. But yes, thank you, everybody. And we'll see, hopefully you'll join us on the 23rd of June. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Jim. Bye-bye.
Bye.